Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Windows 11 24H2 is now available in preview. Also, a techie sleuth has successfully run Microsoft's new recall feature on unsupported hardware. And a publication is being sued for controversial AI-generated interview. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, or MDM to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And of course, also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Microsoft has begun the early rollout of Windows 11 24H2, with it being made available via the release preview channel. As covered in previous episodes of this podcast, this update includes HDR background support, an energy saver mode, sudo for Windows, integration of Rust in the Windows kernel, Wi-Fi 7 support, scrollable quick settings flyout from the taskbar, the ability to create 7-zip and tar archives directly in File Explorer, and enhanced Bluetooth low-energy audio device connectivity, plus more. And I'll share a link with information about this release, so you can check that out for yourself if you want to read more. And you'll find that at 5bytespodcast.com under episode 336. But also, Microsoft has said that Cortana, Tips, and WordPad will be automatically removed on systems upgraded to the upcoming Windows 11 24H2 release, as these components are now considered deprecated. Whatever about Cortana and Tips, I think the deprecation of WordPad could be significant, as that's kind of been a little bit of a conduit for those who want to generate rich text documents, maybe programmatically on just regular vanilla Windows machines that don't have a different word processor installed. So it'll be interesting to see if there's any blowback from that being removed in future. While the recently announced recall feature from Microsoft that I covered on last week's episode will not be available widely to those running Windows 11 24H2, as there's a pretty hefty hardware requirement, as the AI features require MPUs like Qualcomm Snapdragon X chips, a Twitter user by the name The Book Is Closed shared a small demo video where they were able to successfully run the recall feature on a machine that technically does not meet the requirements. WindowsCentral.com reports that even though Windows Recall seemingly works without an MPU, at least in this case, in this demo video, it's likely not something you're going to want to enable on a PC that doesn't have one. With an MPU present, some of the Windows Recall's features will offload to that MPU, which obviously frees up your CPU and GPU for other tasks. Although, I'm sure I'm not the only one, There were great promises of having GPUs and the fact that for graphics intensive loads that the GPU would do the hard work of handling that, freeing up CPU cycles and just result in better performance of your machine in general while doing these intensive workloads. I haven't really seen that on my day-to-day because there just seems to be applications that don't utilize the GPU, they continue to utilize the CPU. I mean, one product that I use a lot is Camtasia, and it's maybe only the last 2 or 3 years that they had a feature to use the GPU when rendering video, and it appears that it's still in preview. I might be wrong because I don't think I'm on the latest version, but in the version that I'm on, which is just from last year, that GPU feature was still in preview. So now there's this MPUs and the possibility that these resource-intensive AI features will use it. Hopefully the fact that, obviously just the last year or so, the generative AI features and services kind of became very mainstream. Hopefully because these MPUs are being delivered early enough and it seems to be kind of a a first-class citizen now in the hardware, at least in the CoPilot Plus PCs, that developers will actually utilize them and free up the CPU. However, if you do try to crack things like this Twitter user did, you can expect that your performance is going to be degraded if you don't have an NPU, because it's going to sap up all the CPU cycles in particular. So while this is cool, someone managed to do this so early on from the actual announcement. No, it comes with the air of caution if you think you're going to be able to do that for yourself and still have decent performance. Another week, another Google Chrome Zero Day. This one is tracked as CVE-2024-5274, and it's a high severity type confusion in V8, which is that JavaScript engine again, and it's responsible for executing JavaScript code. And according to bleepingcomputer.com, a type confusion vulnerability occurs when a program allocates a piece of memory to hold a certain type of data, but mistakenly interprets the data as a different type. This can lead to crashes, data corruption, as well as arbitrary code execution. I think if you listen to the podcast, I cover vulnerabilities so regularly. Sometimes I'll go into giving an explanation like that, but I don't do it every time because I just cover vulnerabilities so often now. And the same vulnerabilities or same components of applications seem to be susceptible to vulnerabilities over and over again. But I guess every once in a while, it might be good to maybe go into that bit of context as well. And I'm sure it's not a surprise, but other Chromium browsers would be affected by this as well. Oddly, though, I did not see an actual severity score out of 10 for this one. Just said NA when I went to the actual CVE in this case. It just says it's a high severity vulnerability, and it is something that has been detected as being exploited in the wild. So obviously it's one that you don't want to sleep on. Unfortunately, this is the 8th zero day for Google Chrome this year. Google's fix is being rolled out to Chrome's stable channel in version 125.0.6422.112 or 0.113 for Windows and Mac. And for Linux, it's 125.0.6422.112. So obviously, as I covered in the past as well in the podcast, Google pushes minor security updates every week now for Google Chrome. So if you haven't gone out and updated the browser yourself at this point, you should be getting it soon. I would say, this is Chrome's 8th zero-day vulnerability, as I said. And yeah, they do release an update every week. From what I've seen, they tend to actually stage updated versions like this earlier. So if you want to manually download and install that, you can. But obviously in an enterprise environment, that may not be too feasible. So something that I've been doing is I've been actually automating my application packaging and putting the applications like Chrome into a container and actually just trickling those out quicker than Google's actually doing it via their update mechanism. So I can share a link to my actual automated application packaging script, which goes ahead and checks to see what version is out every single day for Chrome. And if there's a new version, it brings it down, containerizes it, and pushes it into an early adopters group. And then I get notified and I can monitor that and then just move it to my production users once I'm satisfied. Microsoft has confirmed that it will start deprecating VBScript in the second half of this year by making it an on-demand feature until it's been completely removed. Microsoft's deprecation plan consists of 3 phases. The first will begin in the second half of this year, like I said, with VBScript enabled by default as an optional feature in Windows 11 24H2. During the second phase, which will start around 2027, so some time away, VBScript will still be available as an on-demand feature but will no longer be pre-installed. VBScript will be retired and eliminated from future versions of Windows as part of Phase 3 of the deprecation process. As a result, all VBScript dynamic link libraries, DLL files, will be removed, and projects that use VBScript will stop functioning according to bleepingcomputer.com. So obviously VBScript is very heavily relied on still. Much of my career has been in application packaging, and MSI packages, Windows installer files, are filled with custom actions that use VB scripts. So this is going to be a major overhaul for a lot of vendors and for a lot of enterprises once VBScript is no longer supported on the OS. So it's probably a good idea to start identifying those VB scripts, because while 2027 seems like it's far away, it's not that far away. I guess the good news is it'll probably still be supported on your existing operating systems. So even past 2027, if you're still on an OS that have VBScript, it sounds like it's going to work. But for future Windows OSs, it's not going to. So I would still say, hey, start now so it's not this major project in a few years' time. It's something that you could just tackle little by little going forward. Last week saw a large outage involving several services, including Bing, CoPilot, ChatGPT, and DuckDuckGo. Those who noticed the issue reported when going to Bing.com that you'd either see a blank page or a page with a 429 HTTP error. However, Bing search still worked if accessed directly. For some reason, the outage only affected the homepage. Some services were down entirely, others were down partially. They were affected for several hours, but back online by morning time Eastern US, so those in the US likely did not incur major headaches due to the services being down or deprecated. Microsoft stated about this issue, quote, "We've shared the following preliminary root cause with customers in Admin Center. An internal service-to-service call within the underlying platform leveraged by CoPilot and Bing traffic was not performing as expected in relation to a specific request that checks a user's eligibility status." End quote. So it sounds like an API issue. And Ars Technica opinion piece took this opportunity to highlight the massive disparity in traffic between Google and Bing, suggesting that, hey, Bing had an outage, and yet it didn't really register as a problem because so many people still use Google. They do not use Bing. It's always interesting to see the data kind of plotted to see how Google is ranking compared to Bing and compared to DuckDuckGo even, but perhaps it's less relevant to this outage since other Google competitors like ChatGPT and DuckDuckGo were also affected. So it's not like, oh, well, look, they could have gone to other sources other than Bing while Bing was down, like DuckDuckGo, or maybe use ChatGPT. Well, if those services were down at the same time, those were not alternatives. So yeah, they would be more inclined to use Google at that time. But it's kind of a misnomer because the majority of people use Google anyways, and very few actually realized that Bing was down, I guess. It's just an odd choice, I think, by the headline writer. I get the feeling that this article was going to be published anyways. And they're like, hey, how can we make this topical? Hey, we'll grab this headline. So, crafty work. If you want to check out the article, I'll share a link to it. It's interesting to see the graph of the usage anyway. But it will also be interesting to see how this goes in future with the likes of ChatGPT and generative AI likely to eat into Google's actual traffic as well. The juggernaut that is Nvidia stock delivered another record quarter and signaled that the AI boom appears to still be going strong, at least for them and their earnings. It's gone up above a $1,000 per share stock price, so pretty spectacular. I recently covered a story on the podcast about people reporting that their deleted pictures on iOS were getting restored, in some cases pictures that they deleted over a year ago. Well, according to bleepycomputer.com, Apple removed a routine in the function responsible for scanning and re-importing photos from the file system, which caused it to then re-index old files on the local file system and add them back to people's galleries, which is why people were seeing this behavior. Security firm Synactive stated about the issue, quote, "Based on this code, we can say that the photos that reappeared were still lying around on the file system, and they were just found by the migration routine added in iOS version 17.5. The reason why those files were there in the first place is unknown," end quote. So still a little bit of mystery as to why the files were still there if the users actually deleted them. From what I understand on iOS, when you delete pictures, they go into a recently deleted folder, and then after I think it's 90 days, it'll automatically purge that. But users could also choose to permanently delete them from the recently deleted files right after they've actually deleted them and put them in there in the first place. So it is curious why they're not really being deleted. I guess it's more like a soft delete and it's just not presenting anymore through the phone. And the files may still linger around, which is probably not good either. But the good news is, apparently this has now been fixed by Apple in a recent iOS update. Google have responded to the many posts on social media that have been showing bizarre results from their new AI overview feature that's available to customers in the US. And in their statement, they said, quote, "The vast majority of AI overviews provide high quality information with the links to dig deeper on the web. Many of the examples we've seen have been uncommon queries, and we've also seen examples that were doctored or that we couldn't reproduce. We conducted extensive testing before launching this new experience, and as with other features we've launched in search, we appreciate the feedback. We're taking swift action where appropriate under our content policies and using these examples to develop broader improvements to our systems, some of which have already started to roll out." End quote. So yeah, I mean, obviously there have been some people who took the opportunity of the reports of the actual AI overview messing up and giving really strange results to make memes out of it and post their own outrageous results, just doctoring the images. However, there have been seemingly some legitimate weird results that have been shared. And I covered some of them on last week's episode of the podcast. And it's interesting, they say, well, they've been unable to reproduce. Now, I haven't really gone into Google's generative AI much at all, but say for ChatGPT, particularly some of the older models, you could ask the same thing multiple times and get different results. So I'm not sure if that's the same for Google's AI overview, but if that is the case, then it's not that surprising that they're unable to reproduce the results, and that would actually negate what they said of, well, we couldn't reproduce it, therefore it didn't happen. But hey, I'm sure they're going to straighten it out anyway. I also find it odd that they said uncommon queries as though that's an excuse. It doesn't seem like a good excuse for their AI just to make stuff up. In a quick hit story, after 28 years, the ICQ messaging app is shutting down. It will be shut down on June 26th. So just about a month away. LeapingComputer.com reports that in its heyday, ICQ boasted over 100 million users on its platform. I'm sure there's people who listen to this podcast who have very fond memories of it. And while obviously it's not going to affect their lives that it's going away now, because who uses it now? No one. That's why it's going away. I'm sure the fact it's going to go away is going to be a reminder of our own mortality, because 28 years, I was like, God, we're getting old. Or at least I'm getting old. RTE has reported a story about Michael Schumacher, who's one of the most successful Formula One drivers of all time, and who unfortunately has not been seen in public since he suffered a serious brain injury when skiing in the French Alps back in December 2013. So it's been 11 years since Michael Schumacher has been seen in public. It's been a very private matter. His family has not shared a whole lot of information about his condition. Obviously, they value his privacy. They do not want him to be seen in his current state. And for the most part, I say for the most part because not always, the media has respected that, it seems. Now, there have been pictures taken from outside the home and pictures of his family. There has been that level of intrusion, but it seems, at least to this point, there has not been any leaked pictures or anything like that of Michael Schumacher in his current state. But this is a rather grim story, and it's technology related because it's AI related. Michael Schumacher's family has actually secured 200,000 euros in compensation from the publishers of a German magazine that printed an AI-generated interview with the 7-time Formula One world champion. Die Aktuelle published a front cover in their April 2023 edition with a picture of a smiling Michael Schumacher and the headline promising Michael Schumacher, the first interview. The subheader added, "It sounded deceptively real, but inside the quotes, it was revealed to have been generated by artificial intelligence." So this is absolutely deplorable and disgusting. Obviously, they grab attention from the cover and from the headline, and people think it's actually true, and then it's just BS generated by AI that's not just disrespectful to those who actually tried to read the articles. You know, they've been duped, but it's highly disrespectful to Michael Schumacher and his family. Hopefully this is not an indication of where AI is going to be taken. And this is unfortunately just another example of how AI can be used for horrible use cases. Well, on that sad note, let's get over to this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up this week, it's a pertinent one. If you've been experiencing issues using MDT console extensions where your application crashes and the console closes, and you see in the application event log there's errors with event IDs 1, 1026, and 1000, well, good news is that Johan has published a fix for this. That's over at deploymentresearch.com, and the issue appears to be specifically with version 2403, so it's a obviously recent release. So hopefully it's not affecting you if you're still on an older release, because it seems to be specific to 2403. But if you are on 2403, you'll want to check out this blog post, and I'll share a link to that with this episode, which again is episode 336. Next up, I listened to an episode of the amazing RunAs Radio podcast last week, which was on the end of Windows 10, and it was obviously by Richard Campbell, who's an awesome host on that podcast, but his guest was Paul Thurrott, and they were talking about, Windows 10 end of support. They were talking about Windows 11 and giving an opinion on that, and it seems like there's not a whole lot of love for Windows 11, and people are feeling that maybe they're being made to move to it against their will. But it was a really, really interesting conversation, and I recommend you check it out. And obviously subscribe to the podcast for RunAs Radio because it is really awesome. And actually, to promote something on my own, last week I hosted a webinar on how to make Windows 11 your last true application migration. We got really good engagement during the webinar. It seemed to be attended pretty well. But if you happen to miss it, that recording is now available on demand, and I will share a link with this episode to that if you want to check it out. And if you're starting your Windows 11 journey, or you're already on that journey to Windows 11, I recommend you check out this webinar because there should be some really good information in there for you. Finally, EMSroute.com had a blog post on Intune Policy refresh intervals versus Configuration Manager refresh intervals versus Configuration Manager refresh. This seems to be a topic that doesn't get covered very widely. I know I saw Marcel Muir do a session on the Intune timings and intervals at the AVD Tech Fest, and it's something that people should really know when they're using those products. So I found it interesting to see this blog post, and you might too. Well, that's it for this episode of the podcast. Last week I said, the release cadence for new episodes might be a little bit different because I have travel coming up. Unfortunately, my travel plans have changed. So the good news is, maybe the episode cadence will be normal again, but I have to wait and see. But hey, as always, thank you so much to the sponsors for enabling me to continue doing this podcast. And obviously, thank you all for listening too, because if I had no listeners, I wouldn't be doing this either. I'll catch you next week.